Jovan, thank you so much for taking time out to do this with me. We are here for our second episode of Brave Beyond the Stage, which is this series we created to reconnect with our alumni storytellers, hear about their initial, experience with This Is My Brave, what it was like to tell their story publicly from the stage, and hear about where life has taken you since then, and get an update on where you are now. So I want to first say, Jovan, you've been with us from almost the very beginning since 2016. And I'm going to let you kind of give an intro of yourself and where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. And I really appreciate the opportunity here. It's kind of like you feel like you've been indoctrinated into a family, essentially, of storytellers and also just, empathizers who want to kind of help people use, their expansion as a means of healing, which has been really cool. Um, yeah, my name is Jovan Mays. I'm from Aurora, Colorado, which is basically the eastern block of Denver, Colorado. Um, and in one of the more diverse, places in the entire United States. Um, I am an arts educator in the public schools, specifying in poetry, and I'm also, performance poet and public speaker. Um, yeah, that's basically who I am. I'm a pretty normal guy, if you really ask me. I spend my time, in thrift stores, antique shops, and spend a lot of time doing youth mentoring, and that's kind of how I roll.
That's awesome. I love that. And you're incredibly talented writer. And we were so excited when we launched the show in Denver for the very first time. We did two shows in Denver that year in 2016, and you were in the first one that Kat Atwell produced for us. And take us back to 2016. Like at that time in your life, where were you at that time in your life? And how did you hear about the show? What drew you in and why did you want to do it?
Yeah, for sure. 2016 was a really interesting time. I was within my second year of being the poet laureate of the city of Aurora, which kind of brought with it a lot of, just sort of interesting priorities to try to navigate as a young poet. A city responsibility was an interesting thing. I'd say
Actually,
like,
Jovan, sorry to interrupt, but tell everyone what it means to be a poet laureate.
well, essentially, you are brought on to write poems about the city and for the city and to create poetry programming about and for the city. And you have a lot of flexibility in how you make that approach. Um, I spent a lot of time, unfortunately, during my post, kind of defending um, my position as somebody who stood for the Black Lives Matter movement, and at a time when city civics weren't willing, wanting to kind of have that sort of intersection and lay. And so, by that time when I was approached by Kat regarding This Is My Brave, I did think that the kind of mental health piece was starting to be something that was a little bit more fixed on my imagine, or, not on my imagination, but just in my mind around, you know, why is a society like this so hesitant of truth, and wanted to start navigating that for myself. And during that time, specifically, I'd kind of experienced a trauma in my life that was, one of the first ones that I've had that really forced me into seeking help. I had sought out help maybe about 8 years prior to that when I was still on campus at the college that I went to in Nebraska. But that was a more sensible situation, in some ways. I was like, people reached out to me because they knew I was going through something, not in this one where I had to kind of like go through that self-advocacy piece. And during that time, my fantastic therapist really dug into who I was as a person. And while I was in a space of like really considering self-harm, um, he leaned into knowing that I was a writer and that writing assignments would be a powerful thing for me. And so we went through a lot of really cool writing assignments. I recall having to make like a list of Jovans to come to like Jovan's big party.
Mm.
And that like list had to be all these versions of you. And he put like an arbitrary number on it because we had like such a space in time in that week, like it would be like a whole week. And so he knew he had to keep me busy and be like, how about 100 people? And he'd be like, really? And now I would just sit there and drill it out. And that made me like have to do all this labor intensive work of some self-investigation. And then
Jovan,
I had,
was that around the time when you lost your friend? That was it, that experience of that brought you to therapy?
oh, are you talking about Zach from my most recent TED Talk?
Yes.
Or yeah, no, that was not that trauma. That was actually back when I was in college.
Okay.
Um, so that was like, my experience with Zach was actually right when I graduated. So yeah, this was definitely like another trauma. And I think that, once I kind of started doing those investigations of like making the list, then Doc was like, you know, imagine then at this party, like a bomb goes off in the middle of the party, and now you have to kind of like make a casualty list and an injury list and a who witnessed list. And then the big key point there was like who stood there, watched it all, and was brave and 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 saw through that. And then that sort of circle navigated, we kind of circled in on that person who kind of became the third grade version of me, who experienced the loss of several grandparents in a really short amount of time. And he kind of became a focal point for me to investigate. And so I started like, Mom, tell me about this. Tell me, Dad, tell me about this, tell me about this. And my mom made the craziest statement to me. She said, Jovan, do you remember the toy box?
Mm.
And I remember being like, that's a really weird response to that type of question. And they were like, no, dude, like you kind of took shelter in a toy box in your room for like a really abnormally long time. And like, we would read you your bedtime story in there. Like we would like
Mm.
deliver you dinner inside there. You would take phone calls inside there. And I had no recollection of this really in my mind. And so it was interesting, because, and I think the most recent show I did talked about like how like in families, in Black families, it's not always like a really heavy conversation of mental health. So I didn't think I was different. I didn't think anything of it. I just kind of moved on. And once I was propositioned with the show, my first instinct was like, well, I mean, I'll never forget my first like rehearsal
Mhm.
and listening to people's stories. And I'm like, I don't know if I belong here. Like
Mhm.
these folks have had medically diagnosed descriptions. Some of them would actually start their talks off with their medications and things like that. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, yeah, I don't think I got it like that. Which is like honestly a constant phrase I think sometimes that I probably said through my life. Like, I don't think I got it like that. But then I started doing that digging with my therapist at that time. And I was like, I think I have something that's worthy of sharing because I think a lot of people um, maybe experienced something from when they were younger
Mhm.
and didn't give that person enough credit. And
Mhm.
so I got sent in my back block of therapy on an assignment to go on Friday walks with
Mm.
that version of myself.
Wow.
Um, and I had like very open dialogues with what I thought to be this version of myself and 8-year-old Jovan. And a
Mhm.
lot of his thoughts were like constantly kind of reinforced with like, you got this. We went through this. You got this.
Mhm.
Like this is that, and I thought, maybe that would be a powerful that exchange would be a powerful thing to kind of turn into a something for the audience. And so yeah, I went through the whole thing. I went and Googled to Fisher Price toy chest to see if I could find where one existed, and I
Mhm.
found one at this random thrift store, and started to use that as kind of a stage prop for that conversation. I was fortunate enough to get other opportunities to perform that poem even after the main show, which was really, really cool. And the main show itself was really, really cool itself. But I was nervous, and I could tell like I had some hitches there. And sometimes, like as a laureate, right, you have events that you read at that you never read that poem again. And so
Mhm.
this is the type of poem that I wanted to make sure that it existed in multiple spaces. Like later on that year, there was a nationwide high school journalism contest that was held in Denver,
Oh,
conference that was held in Denver, and I veiled it there. And
mm,
that's when I could see young people be like, whoa, I felt something like that before too. And I think that's a big part of the strength of the program. This is my brave is creating that intersection with the audience and the performer of like, yeah, I felt that too.
mhm.
Um, because with I don't think any of this would exist without that. And so um, I think as I kind of, dug deeper into some of those navigational spaces, as a person, that's when I started to see like, okay, you are actually bringing something to the table, Jovan, that I think a lot of people have experienced.
Mhm.
And it's now part of your job to kind of make sure that you follow that trail, because I think it will help with powerful things.
Yeah,
Like maybe what, like 2 years later, I'm with like yourself and Amanda at the Colorado Health Foundation, which is like a
oh,
huge, I mean, this state has a gigantic commitment to mental health. And that's
mm,
like one of the largest platforms that you can be on to be able to share your story, your narrative. And we got that experience, which was really a blessing. So
it was awesome. You got to share the poem again, and I got to share kind of my story and how it led to This Is My Brave. And Amanda shared this powerful song about her recovery from addiction. And I think we moved a ton of people that day, and it still lives out there. But yeah, that was amazing to get to do that with you a couple years later. Was that, I think it was 2018 we did that.
mhm.
But yeah, it's relatable. I think that's where even you, even your story of saying like I at the first rehearsal felt like I didn't maybe belong there. I've heard that from other This Is My Brave alums. Is same thing. Like I don't quite identify, but then the more they listen in on the stories, they're like, yeah, I do have something to share. And then it gets developed through the rehearsal process. So then 2016, after 2016, take us through like up till today, because then most recently last year, I think it was in the summer, late summer, you were like, I see this project you're working on and I want to be one of those storytellers. And we talked about our most recent initiative with stories from the Black community, and you contributed heavily in that project with 2 poems. So, but take me through like the last like 5 years, like how has life changed for you?
Well, I think that, I had some folks kind of give me some commentary on like my poetry catalog. And one of the things that I got that I never really honestly noticed is that I don't write about what is occurring for me internally very often. Um, and anybody who's kind of like familiar with my catalog knows that I'm a pretty emotive person. I feel, emotion is a big part of like who I am as a poet and a writer. And maybe that's my power, is my ability to like externally empathize or relay. But I really struggled with that, I think, on the inside, because I don't know, like I'm like a lot of people. I'm like a big time processor, and sometimes it's like the bane of my existence, the depth of which I can process that I don't always come up with conclusion with. And as I've kind of spent some time over the past few years, trying to like even do some career analysis, and trying to figure out, how do I go to the next level as a poet or a writer, and what even is the next level. Um, those were kind of conversations that I didn't even think, like, because this is how my brain normally works. I didn't even think that those were poetically worthy. Like
Mm,
these thoughts, right? These like thoughts of like, should I? Oh my goodness, like I'm jealous. Oh my goodness, I have, envy. Oh my goodness, like these are things that exist. And so I didn't really know exactly what to do with those things. I think one of the things when you decide to be a kind of a communitarian and a poet, it's really easy to get, fixed into your lesson plans more so than your actual construction of work, which
Mhm.
is like a little bit of a challenge there too. And then also, like I have just over the course, I'd say over the last decade, I've just really grown in my mental health and social justice advocacy role as a citizen.
Mhm.
And in that knowledge, I've like really said, Jovan, if you want to be, I always feel this way, like if you're going to create a lesson plan for people to write into, you better do it yourself.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and and that's something that I had to start kind of driving myself to as I wanted to create more mental health and social justice narratives, to the public. At that point in time, that's when I went full time with Aurora Public Schools. um, I started a youth storytelling series called Aurora Story. That was a primary piece of our existence. I was housed in the mental health department inside of my district, and that was my goal, was to try to figure out how to bring that stuff to the table. And I needed to figure out like, hey, you got to walk the walk, bro, if you're going to be inside of this, even if you don't speak of mental health in the terms of depression,
Sure.
anxiety, of those terms, you have to speak in what your mental health means for you, Jovan. And my department is fantastic on, really preaching the values of wellness and self-care. And those are elements too that I feel like are like kind of um, lower level, like you kind of have to go find those. They don't always find you.
Yeah.
And learning about like what that looks like for me, and as you know, so for a while there, I stopped asking folks, how are you doing? And graduated, how are you doing? To like, are you taking care of yourself? What's your self
Mm.
care look like? And that's like kind of I would think like a graduation or maturation that I've hit in the mental health conversation. I also started working for another fantastic organization um, called Project Pave, which is and essentially a relationship violence organization, and they have a strand called True Man, which talks to like teenage males about toxic masculinity and their emotions and how to manage those things. And being able to work with that organization, both those really kind of set me in that time gap in between. And so,
Mm.
with the pandemic and, prior to the pandemic, I really had a nice like little branding plan I was trying to put together for myself. And then it just like went kaput. And then I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to navigate the rest of this time here. And that's when I reached out to you after kind of seeing some of the postings that a Voices from the Black Community version of This Is My Brave was going to get posted, and then I just wanted to be involved. I didn't even know if I wanted to be involved as a storyteller. I just wanted to know that I just wanted to be involved. I just needed to kind of, I don't know. I think now essentially doing this mental health work is kind of a part of my self-care now.
No,
Um,
I
and
hear you.
so, yeah. And so I think that's where that kind of came from there to get involved with that series. And yeah, things have been really cool from there. I mean, the series is great.
Yeah, I think I mean, I know already from some of the feedback we've received from people who watched it was, I connected with Swia's story. She was in the first volume. We broke you guys into two groups to have two smaller shows, but I connected with Swia's story. I'm going to contact my therapist and my psychiatrist now to talk about trying medication again. And like, that's why we put these stories out, is to say it's okay to get help. And, we all go through things at times. Take care of your mental health. I mean, your poetry spoke to that, the self-care in the first poem. It was really about like the pressure you put on yourself, but also finding that balance and, really taking care of yourself. And then the second one, addressing racism, addressing the challenges of, you know, the a black boy, like, approaching life and what you go through. I mean, it was so powerful.
Yeah, I appreciate the, the analysis. Yeah, I don't know, the the way that mental health resources have been divvied out in this environment, um, um, follows an American trend, um, which is to like minimalize um, the experience of people of color.
Mhm.
And um, I feel like I watched this video on repeat, quite literally, with insert name here, child, father, uncle, auntie, sister, being publicly executed on film,
Mhm.
um, attached to um, no dialogue in the national sphere around what that communal impact would be.
Mhm.
I was reading the other day about this thing. Um, two things. One thing was called the Igbo landing, which was an experience where blacks were coming into a port, I believe in Georgia, who had taken over their slave ship and knew that upon arriving on the coastline that they would go back into servitude, and all took their lives.
Oh, wow.
I learned about, Natchez, Mississippi, the Devil's Punch Bowl, a post-Civil War concentration camp where blacks were mass executed, that none of us know about.
I
Here
think,
in Go ahead.
go ahead, sorry.
Here in Colorado, I work on an organization called the Colorado Lynching Memorial Project, where we have really worked hard with the Equal Justice Initiative to tell the story of a young Black boy by the name of Preston Porter, who on November 16th, 1900, was lynched by way of fire,
Mm.
um, where they erected a railroad tie, bound this 15-year-old, by all means, special needs African American boy without any evidence, a shred of evidence of his attachment to a murder that took place in his town,
Mm.
and built a fire fortress around him and invited people from all over the network to come into this place.
Mm.
And somehow the distribution of mental health resource missed us.
Mm.
And somehow, even still, when I watch my environment here in Aurora, which we have a lot of immigrant refugees inside of inside of our city, somehow that mental health resource misses these folks. And so I just kind of felt like the second that I saw that you guys were curating a program of that sort,
Mhm.
my antennas went up immediately because it's something that I think about so often. And
Yeah.
want to try to be some sort of impact there. So
Yeah. I mean, the Kaya said it so well in her intro, is that the effects of systemic racism on the trauma, the compounded trauma for the Black community, has severe repercussions on mental health, and it has not been addressed for so long. And I think that's one of the things that um, has started to come to the forefront, is that we need more resources. And, you know, that's what we wanted to just try to start a program to enable those conversations to begin and to continue. And we are looking forward to keeping it going and building it, because it's so important. So thank you for being a part of the very first one. And I encourage everyone to check out Jovan's 2 poems from that performance. We'll link them in the notes for this video. But um, what would you say is, going back to your comment about toxic masculinity, is like how else can we be changing that conversation for men and boys, in helping them realize that it's okay to have your emotions and to feel them, and to not ignore them.
I gotta say, man, I benefit from like having a tremendous couple of leaders with my organization, True Man. Um, between Jalen Love and Derek McCoy, they have really thought through a curriculum that like is really press and play as far as like getting that first initial conversation rolling. It's interesting too, like when I teach poetry, that thing exists too. A lot of students aren't they don't struggle with poetry once they start writing, but starting writing is difficult for them. And I think that same thing applies for our conversations with True Man. So one simple thing we do is like we just ask the young men to put a numerical assignment on how they're actually doing,
Mhm.
right? So that we just ask them to check in with each other. Imagine like a whole entire room of a full school's high school football team, right? Like, and we're in a room with them, and it's like,
Mhm.
you know, from 1 to 10, how are you doing? They say what their number is, and then you get cross investigated on like, what's the number mean, right? And that's a thing that like a lot of people just generally like are not used to being asked, and so it takes away that thing that happens when we're asked like how we're doing, and we have to feel like we have to come up with this prescribed answer and actually give an actual answer that can socially kind of happen in a pretty easy way. We also ask them like, you know, things we'll have like two characters that will kind of promote on each side of a room. Like one would be like Kevin Hart, and like one would be like The Rock, right?
Okay.
And we ask the question, who's the truest man, right?
Mm.
And then they pick whatever one they're on their sides. You know, they go on, they make arguments for both sides. While they're making their arguments, we're documenting all the arguments on the board, all the different arguments that are that are for their character. Um, and then once the activity is done, we do that with maybe like 3 or 4 characters. We must have like 100 some odd, um, 100 some odd like, you know, characteristics that are on our board. We said, you know, can these same characteristics be characteristics for women? Right? And they're like, yeah. And like, so we're just like trying to break down like that our identifications of masculinity are just our identifications of what a true human is or a true
Mhm.
person is, and trying to break down some of that simplicity. We also have another great activity where we have like a mask, and we talk about like what you're showing society, and then
Mm.
versus like what's actually inside, and they kind of like write and use art on both sides of those to kind of tell that story, those narratives. But it's a really powerful program, and they've like figured out the partnerships to be able to get the audience that they want to have, which I mean I'm sure you have had to battle through to try to figure out since you started your program, and it's just been a really glorious thing to be a part of.
And
I
they're in
think that
high schools?
mostly high schools, but we kind of take on a lot of different things. And again, there's a real open-mindedness amongst our team, as far as the audiences that we work with, because we obviously know that, you know, we could have this conversation with older adults
Mhm.
significantly as well, and those conversations deepen themselves too into consent and into relationship protocols and stuff like that as well, which is really really powerful. I mean,
Mhm.
I think for me, um, this really drove me to go back into the sport of wrestling. You know,
Mm.
when I was a junior in high school, my best friend on the wrestling team, Sheldon Taylor, took his own life. And it made me, and then when I went to college, you know, you watch almost like 40% of like your freshman incoming class fall off, like they don't even make it to the next year for the team. The
Mm.
mental health that sport really challenges young men with, to, you know, a be their best selves, which is like the positive parts of it, but
Mhm.
also b bring out the worst of people, is
Mm.
something that I really wanted to work on, which is like really kind of honestly the mental health piece has driven me to be more involved. And so I am now an assistant coach at my alma mater, and it's a really really cool experience so far.
That's so awesome. Just to be able to lend your experience and really teach the young people. I mean, we're finding that too with our high school program that we're building in our college edition, is that these kids are hungry to understand how to take care of their mental health, and you're showing them, which is phenomenal. I love what you said earlier about, instead of asking people how you're doing, asking them, how are you taking care of yourself today? Because we should all be thinking in that mindset of not only COVID times, but also just having that forefront of, um, we need to be taking care of our mental health every day. So,
For sure.
uh, all right, Jovan. So wrapping up, tell us about what things that you have on the horizon that you're excited about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you know, communities like yours and other communities that I've joined, like, really get you thinking about impact and what your impact is going to be. I think in a society that we're in right now, I mean, like, it's like pick up your shovel, man. Like, I mean, you can do it wherever you want to do it. But I
Mhm,
think, I've really, done it at the best level I know how to in the writing world for a while now.
mhm,
And I've been thinking about what some crossover looks like for me. Obviously, like I talked about other things that would promote crossover, but I myself am a diabetic. And after kind of watching myself struggle through my diabetic kind of time, watching my father do the same, and then honestly learning the stories of my grandfather and amputations and all these
mhm,
other things like that, I have realized that there's a real significant mental health piece to
mhm,
heart disease in this country that I want to figure out how to have an impact in. So that's something that I'm trying to work to try to. I'm working with the Denver Health Foundation to try to start like building on some of those conversations to be able to kind of be, create curriculum in spaces like that, especially like with like navigating the shame and
sure.
then like, and then owning the identity, right?
Mhm,
Which is, I mean, those are both really, this is my brave type of things,
yeah.
right? And then the other space that I feel like I want, to have um a little bit more impact in is like I believe that there's space for me to start having a much deeper conversation in this athletics arena,
Mhm,
and so I'm starting to kind of investigate what that's going to look like for myself. But I think that learning how to kind of distribute connection and communalization um, from resources like yourself and from a lot of the resources that I paired myself up with, I do feel like I have now kind of prepared myself to go out there and try my best to sort of improve environments the way that I know that that improvement can happen. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. As a writer, I'm I've, if you go back to the last, this is my brave that I was a part of. My poem talks a lot about my woes and my struggles as a creative, and I've really been pushing myself to sort of fight through a plateau that I've been sort of like dealing with, I guess, for a while here. And I think what it would look like on that summit would be a published book of poetry that I'm very proud of. That I'm just cranking on. The
we
book kind
can't
of talks about,
wait.
yeah, my book kind of talks about the intersection. It's very, very weird, very, very Jovan though, but it's like the intersection between our country's historical treatment of circus elephants and our country's historical treatment of Black youth.
Mm,
And there's some really interesting parallels in there to me of recruitment, of treatment, of entertainment exploitation, and of forgottenness once the thing served its role. And I'm
mm,
trying to figure out how to tell that whole story, which is a little bit of a difficult one to tell.
well, I think you're off to a great start, and I love all that you've done and all that you continue to do, and that we're connected, and I know we'll do more work together. So
Mhm.
we've been connected for a while now, and I know that you have a lot more to contribute as well. And I'm so proud of you, and I'm so grateful that you spent this time with us to share more about your experience with This Is My Brave. So, everybody, check out the links. We'll share a link also to True Man and any other organizations that you mentioned that we can, share with folks that they can check out. So, keep doing the work you're doing, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much, and thank you for thinking about me, and thank you for committing yourself to your purpose. It's doing some powerful things.
Awesome. Thanks, Jovan.